about the Korean War. So this is going to be a war that's going to be fought, obviously, between North and South Korea. But the United States, the United Nations, and China are going to get involved pretty heavily. The whole reason why the United States and the United Nations got involved in this is because of a policy of containment. So our goal at this point is to contain communism from spreading out any further than it has. Okay, so we'll get into why the war started, and we'll get into what it looks like today. So. Okay, so at the end of World War II, the American and Soviet forces had entered Korea in order to disarm Japanese troops who were stationed there. So you can see Korea as this peninsula here, and it's right here next to China, and it's really close to Japan as well. Okay, so Japanese troops during the war, many of them were stationed there, so that's why our Allied forces went in there. So the Allies divided Korea at the 38th parallel of latitude. Okay, and this is going to be important because the 38th parallel is going to continue to be important even after the war. So this part is North Korea. This became a communist country. Okay, so the Soviets set up a communist government there, while the Americans set up a democratic government in South Korea. So the Soviets did give military aid to the North, and so their troops, their military had grown exponentially, and we weren't doing that for the South Koreans. So the North Koreans militarily were much more powerful than the South. So June 25th, 1950, the North Koreans invaded into South Korea. And so Truman, as a response, President Truman asked the United Nations to act against the communist invasion of South Korea. So remember, I told you we're determined to contain communism, so that policy of containment. So the American, United Nations, and South Korean troops pushed back the advancing North Korean troops. Okay, so they invaded all the way almost to the whole peninsula. You're going to see, I'm going to show you a map here on the next page, and it's going to move and stuff that shows you where that was. So then when we get involved, we're going to push back almost to China. Okay, we get right up to the border. And then as a result, the communist Chinese government saw this as a threat to them, and they demanded that they stop advancing. But the American UN troops did not care. They continued to advance. And so China is going to begin a massive attack with hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops, and they're going to push back across the border. So the UN forces are going to be pushed back. So this map here is going to show that. Okay. This is a GIF, so it just plays. This is what it looks like at the end. Okay, it's almost there. You can see it's not moving. It will here in a second. All right, so now we're at 1950. There we go. So we're at the 38th parallel, and that's the northern invasion, all the way down to Busan, and then up almost to the Chinese border, and then they push back, and then the UN forces push back again, just across the 38th parallel, and this is where we started. So this doesn't move. This stays where it is. This right here is what's called the DMZ, or the Demilitarized Zone today, and this is the same line that divides North and South Korea. Okay, from 1951 until 1953, when the armistice is finally signed. This line does not move. Okay, so General MacArthur was a big war hero from World War II, but he demanded approval to expand the war against China. So he thought if we could just go in and just annihilate them, then they'll back off and we'll win. But President Truman did not like that idea. He wanted a limited war, so he wanted to scale back on war. So as a result of that, MacArthur is going to go and publicly criticize the president. Well, as a result of that, he gets fired. So even though he's a war hero, he's going to get fired from this. So, like I said, Truman wanted a limited war. So this is a war that's only fought to achieve a limited objective, like containing communism. And so by 1951, the UN forces had pushed Chinese and North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel, and then it's not until 1953 that an armistice was signed. And then it wasn't until 2018 that a peace treaty was signed. So in 2018, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he went to North Korea and negotiated a peace treaty with them. And it was signed by Kim Jong Un, who's the current leader of the North Koreans, and President Trump. Okay, so the end of the war. So the Korean War was an important turning point in the Cold War. So it wasn't just using political pressure and economic aid to contain communism. This is the first time we actually use our military and fighting in a war to contain communism. So the Korean War expanded the Cold War beyond Europe and into Asia. And so the idea is to stop it from spreading into Asia on the east, almost the Eastern Front, and then the Western Front in Europe as well. Okay, so this video, it's a short video, kind of goes through and explains a lot of what I just explained.
The Korean War, June 25th, 1950 through July 27th, 1953. At the end of World War II in 1945, Korea was freed from Japanese control. North Korea was occupied by the Soviets while the South was occupied by American forces. By 1948, the country was divided in half at the 38th parallel, with the capitalist South ruled by Syngman Rhee and the communist North ruled by Kim Il-sung. The Soviet troops withdrew from Korea in 1948, and U.S. troops withdrew in 1949. However, North and South Korea, as enemies of one another, would not accept the border between them as permanent. The North Koreans attacked South Korea on June 25, 1950, advancing across the 38th parallel. Around 75,000 troops of the North Korean People's Army defeated the Republic of Korea's army with success, capturing the capital city of Seoul, then occupying the whole of South Korea except for Busan. This was a problem, as President Truman in the United States wanted to contain the spread of communism by preventing the domino effect. That is, if Korea fell, so would other countries to the ideology. South Korea appealed for support, and the United States pushed a resolution through the United Nations Security Council. The USSR did not use its veto power, as it was boycotting the council because the new communist China was not accepted. In China's seat was the pro-US Chinese nationalist government of Taiwan. An appeal was made by the Security Council for North Korea to withdraw its troops, but was ignored. As a result, approval was granted for a UN army made up of an international force of 16 nations to send help to South Korea, commanded by General Douglas MacArthur. The UN troops, composed mainly of Americans, landed in South Korea in early July, but were soon pushed back on the defense by the North Korean forces, forming a perimeter around Busan to defend the line until reinforcements arrived in August. Now that their position was strengthened, MacArthur went on the offensive. On September 15th, the U.S. Marines X-Corps launched an amphibious assault at Incheon. The North Korean troops were pushed back on the retreat over the 38th parallel, and soon Seoul was recaptured along with the whole of South Korea by the end of the month. Now, MacArthur was to go beyond the initial idea of containment. Truman, worried of a Chinese response, nevertheless approved, and UN troops moved into North Korea on October 7, 1950. On October 12th, they captured Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, and then the Yalu River, which was the border with communist China. China retaliated by helping the North Koreans, sending 250,000 Chinese troops. The UN troops, overwhelmed by this new force, were pushed out of North Korea with heavy losses. By January 1951, Chinese and North Korean troops had captured Seoul. General MacArthur wanted to use the atom bomb on China and was dismissed for insubordination by President Truman, who went back to a policy of containment. In June 1951, more UN troops were sent to Korea, eventually driving the North Korean army to the 38th parallel and stabilizing the front. Now, a stalemate set in. In July, peace talks began, but a compromise could not be found. Meanwhile, fighting continued, and American pilots fought in the air against Soviet pilots using Chinese jet fighters and wearing Chinese uniforms. General Dwight D. Eisenhower took over as president in early 1953 and sought an end to the war. After 2 years of negotiation, an armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, at Panmunjom on the 38th parallel. a demilitarized zone was set up, which stands to this day. Subscribe and click the notification bell for more history videos.
All right, that's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to do your processor and enjoy the rest of your day.